Hey guys, tonight we set sail into the silence after the storm. The moment the sea grows quiet, the gunpowder fades, and the price of freedom comes due. You are a pirate, a legend, a woman no man dared command. But now, shackled and bruised, you're something else entirely, a question no court wants to answer. Here is the English translation. So, before you get completely comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. Leave a comment to let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always find it fascinating to see who's joining this sleepy journey worldwide. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on a quiet fan if you like that soft hum, and let's gently drift into tonight's story. You open your eyes in the dark. No sea breeze, no shredded sails flapping above your head. Only a damp stone ceiling and walls so cold your bones shrink beneath your skin. Your wrists ache, pulled taut by a rusted chain clamped to an iron ring in the floor. The air is thick with the scent of old metal, stagnant water, and rat droppings. You're no longer on the ship, no longer in command. No longer the woman who once stood on deck during a storm, daring the sky itself, without needing anyone's permission. Now, you are just a creature locked up for daring to live like a man, without asking first. You used to read the wind, feel the tide through the soles of your feet, make hardened sailors hold their breath when you draw your blade in silence. But now, everything is still as windless as water. No one calls you captain. No one speaks your name with fear or loyalty. They give you a new one, ending in two cold words: the prisoner. When they caught you, you didn't scream. You looked around, your crew scattered in blood across the deck. Some are still breathing. You were dragged away, your boots grinding over the very freedom you had once claimed with blood, rum, and steel. Now you're here, in a cell with no window. Only a narrow slit near the ceiling, just enough light for the rats to see you apart from the straw. Each night, you hear the guards laugh, someone crying, and sometimes a mocking voice says, "Is it really a woman?" No one believes you were ever a captain. No one believes you commanded men. They can't accept the existence of a woman who didn't behave, especially one who survived too many times and never apologized for it. You don't know what day it is. No one bothers to tell you. They only ask, "What ship were you on? How many raids? Who did you kill?" You stay silent, not out of fear, but because they don't want the truth. They want a reason to punish. When night falls, you dream of the sea. In your dream, your hands grip the wheel. The bow cuts through the water. Wind runs wild through your hair. Gunpowder. Room. Someone singing, drowned in the roar of waves. But when you wake, the chain still tugs your wrist. The cold still clings to your throat. And in this tiny cell, the ocean is just a memory, distant and bitter as an unhealed wound. You used to think you weren't afraid of death, but it turns out, what's worse than dying is being stared at like a curiosity. A woman who climbed aboard. A mistake of nature. No one's punishing you for theft. They're punishing you for freedom. Freedom you never asked permission for. One rainy night, water drums were on the roof, like the rhythm of boots on deck. You close your eyes and whisper, "Trim the starboard sail. Port 30 degrees. Hold the bow steady." No one hears you, but you say it anyway, to remind yourself you are still you. Whatever happens, trial or no trial, noose or nooseless alley, you know one thing. You lived, truly, fiercely, freely. And though your body is locked in stone, your memory sails on the sea, in the wind, through every shattered piece of someone who once was called captain. You're in the old prison cell. where you've just survived your first night. And the story is only beginning. On the first morning after your capture, the guards come to check the cells. 3 of them were holding a list and wearing eyes full of suspicion. One of them crouches, looks at you with a tilted head, and mutters half-jokingly, "She's a woman?" It's not a strange question. You've heard it 100 times. On the ship, in taverns, on the docks, when you walked into a room full of men and gave orders, when you drew your sword faster than a 6-foot sailor, when you stepped over a corpse without blinking. They didn't believe you were a woman, because they didn't know a woman could be that silent, that ruthless, that unwavering. And in a world built around the image of the gentle, obedient woman waiting on the porch, you became a paradox that made people uncomfortable. Too different to be a man, too strong to be a woman, too dangerous to be spared. But strangely enough, once captured, no one believes you're a woman became your first fragile armor against the gallows. They didn't treat you like a woman. They treated you like an oddity, a man with no beard, something undefined. And in that confusion, your execution was delayed. When caught, many female pirates chose to hide in male appearances. They cut their hair, wore trousers. I spoke in low tones, smoked and cursed in 10 languages. Not because they wanted to be men, but because men had a better chance of surviving prison. Men were judged like warriors. Women were considered as shameful mistakes. You knew that well. You once heard about another female pirate, small, long-haired, delicate like a girl in a woodcut painting, beaten to broken bones by guards simply for not belonging here. They didn't see her as an enemy. They saw her as an error to erase. But you, with your wind-worn face, voice rough as fire, an unblinking stare, made them hesitate. They weren't sure whether to put you in the men's or women's cells, whether to interrogate you or stay away. You've killed before, not for cruelty, but to survive. And every time you drew your blade, you asked yourself, will I be judged twice as harshly just because I carry what the world calls a weaker gender? You're not weak. You've hung from the mast in storms and rowed against the wind and strangled a drunken sailor twice your size just because he touched where he shouldn't. And afterward, you sat down, feet on the powder chest, and laughed. And yet now, tied up, you've become a topic of gossip. Is she really a woman? Maybe she's faking it for mercy. What kind of woman has a face like that? You stay silent. Stare at the stone wall, count the cracks, and think to yourself, the fewer people who believe I'm a woman, the longer it'll take them to dare kill me. In prison, you meet another woman, thin as straw, hair cut short, teeth gone from fever. She was a net mender, caught stealing fish. When she hears you once raided ships, she doesn't ask anything, just nods and says, "If you looked like me, you'd be dead already." You understand. Women in prison have 3 paths: cry, endure, or turn to stone. You chose the third. No one calls you Miss, Sister, or that woman, just Prisoner 17. Not to deny your gender, but to survive the stares, the curiosity, the hate. The trial is coming. You'll be dragged into the light. Your gender will no longer be hidden, and you'll have to choose. Let them see a crying, pleading woman, or a woman standing tall, hands bound, head high. You know they'd prefer the first. It makes them feel stronger, justifies the judgment. But you also know you don't need their forgiveness. You only need them not to forget, because in an age where a woman daring to take the helm is forbidden, the fact that you still exist, even in chains, is an act of defiance. And so you sit there. Someone who once crossed oceans is now silent in a cramped room, waiting for others to decide their fate. No one believes you're a woman. And perhaps right now, That's the only lucky thing you've got. There's no gentle calling, just the groan of a wooden door opening in the dark and a gravelly voice commanding, "Prisoner 17, get up." You know this is the moment. They'll ask questions, take notes, intimidate, maybe beat you, maybe torture you in ways you haven't imagined yet. But you're not afraid. You just feel strange. Because only days ago, you were standing on the ship's deck, boots smudged with soot, hands steering the wind, hair matted with sweat and sun. Now, you walk down a cold corridor, bare feet touching the stone, the clink of chains echoing like a reminder. You're no longer free. The interrogation room is small, a table, 2 chairs, a stack of worn papers, an ink bottle, its cap dried shut. No torture tools on the wall, no dried blood on the floor like the tales you've heard from sailors. But you know, the scariest thing here isn't a knife. It's the voice that's about to speak. The first to enter is a clerk. Young, clean hands, eyes only for the paper, not for you. The second man is different, older. He wears a judge's coat, hunched back, but a voice rigid as a ship's mast. Your name? You stay silent. Full name, still nothing. You know this game. If you say Mary, they'll ask, which Mary? If you say Captain Mary, they'll laugh. But if you stay silent, they get irritated. And that is your last piece of power. The man glances at the clerk. The clerk writes, uncooperative. You nearly laugh. Do they think fear will make you comply? You faced Royal Navy ships and fought with a rusted knife until your last drop of blood. A few questions won't break you. They change tactics. Where did you board the ship? Who was the leader? How many in the crew? Have you killed anyone? You answer some, sparingly, sometimes truthfully, sometimes not. Not to deceive, but to test how much they know. What you discover, they know nothing. These are only rumors from survivors, statements from captured sailors who've painted a blurry figure, an unnamed female captain, northern accent, tall, ruthless, quiet, never smile. You blink. For a moment, you feel amused. Not because you're flattered to be painted as a monster, but because you realize they still don't know who you are. And as long as they don't know, you're still alive. Time drags. You don't know how long. The room grows colder. Someone brings water. Not for you. Just set it on the table. The ink leaves a violet stain as it spreads. The interrogator never raises his voice. He doesn't need to. Each question is a thread, trying to pull you from the cliff's edge of silence into their trap, where your own words can be used against you. You guard your answers like the last blade hidden in your boot, only drawn when necessary. Have you ever worn men's clothing to deceive others? Did you engage in immoral acts on the ship? Did you seduce your crewmates? You raise your head. This is no longer an interrogation. This is a gender trial. They don't want to know what you did. They want to see if you're worthy of being a woman. In that moment, it becomes clear. What unsettles them isn't your piracy. It's that you didn't ask permission to be yourself. The session ends with a dry statement. We'll review your file, not testimony, and miss. For the first time since your capture, someone calls you that. But from his mouth, miss sounds like an insult. You rise, the chains tug at your arms. Someone opens the door. You look back at the interrogator, not with hatred or fear, just calm. Then you leave. Back in the cell, your back aches, your throat is dry. You lie down on the stone floor. You don't sleep, but you don't dream either. You begin to understand that freedom isn't lost in battle. It's lost in rooms like that, with questions like those. by people rewriting your story in ways that make them feel comfortable. But you're still here. You haven't confessed. You haven't surrendered. And in the silence of night, among mold and dripping water, you dream once again of standing at the ship's bow. The wind rises. The sea never stays quiet for long. And neither do you. Every morning in prison is the same. A faint sliver of light slipping through the cracks in the stone. The sound of guards' boots along the worn path. And the stench of stagnant water that hasn't yet evaporated. But today, something is different. When the guard stops, you know you're about to be summoned again. You don't resist. There's no choice. The chains tug slightly at your wrists every time you rise. The iron lock clicks like a reminder. You belong to them now. This time, it's not the plain wooden room with ink-stained paper. You're led deeper. Where the air smells of smoldering fire, the walls are dark with soot and echoes drift faintly, as if someone once screamed here long ago. You don't need anyone to say where you are. There is no need for confirmation. This is where the silent are made to speak. The man waiting for you wears no judge's robes and carries no notebook. He doesn't need to know your name, only that you will talk, one way or another. You're tied to a chair. The coarse rope scrapes your wrists, not deeply, but steadily. Cold. Harsh. There's something under a cloth on the table. You can't tell if it's a clamp, a blade, or something designed to frighten. But you know. This room isn't built for asking. It's for breaking. The questions repeat. How many were on your ship? Did you plan the attack? Name those who survived. You answer, with your eyes. Cold, steady, unwavering. Not because you're fearless, but because you know everything you say will be twisted. You once gave orders. Now they demand you recount every detail of a life washed away by the sea. But their writing isn't to record, it's to reshape. When you say you boarded with a small group, they write, structured pirate organization. You say you steered through a storm, and they write, commanded strategic criminal operations. You describe defending yourself in battle, and they write, mastermind behind civilian killings. Your story is no longer yours. At one point you consider lying, giving fake names, and inventing tales, just to see what they'd do. But then you realize that truth and fiction mean the same to them. They only need words to complete a sentence, and a sentence to condemn you. No one wants to listen. They just want to finish the paperwork. Eventually, you're untied. Return to your cell. No beatings, no whips, no torture devices like you'd imagined. But back in your cell, you notice your wrists are bruised, joints aching, and somewhere deep in your chest, something has broken. Not bone, but the belief that truth matters. That night, you lie curled on the stone floor, the rope marks still etched into your skin. You think of all the things you didn't say, the ones you once lived beside, faces now lost in gun smoke, choices only you understood. You used to believe you'd die in battle, fall on your ship, sword still in hand. But death here takes another form. It comes through distortion, through words you never said, but are now stamped as yours. Once, you commanded a crew with your voice. Now, words are used to bind you tighter than any shackle. No one will write your story the way it truly happened. You don't need praise. You only wanted to tell it in your voice. But that is a luxury not granted to someone judged before ever being heard. So you do the only thing you can. Remain silent. You keep your story like something living, buried deep inside, so that when you die, at least one part of you remains intact, untouched by ink and the voices of strangers. In the dark, you close your eyes. No dreams, no wishes, just a steady breath, and one thought: as long as I keep my story, I haven't lost. Tomorrow they'll interrogate you again, write more words you never spoke. But you've decided that you will not give them what they expect for the rest of your life. Because you know, those who live by the blade may die by the noose, but they never fall to lies. You don't know where the transcript of your testimony is now. Maybe it's lying in a damp archive room, buried among hundreds of yellowing pages. Perhaps it was burned. Either way, that record, which never truly captured you, will still be used to tell your story after you've vanished. The irony is that the more distorted you become, the more mythical you grow. People love a tidy tale: name, age, motive, consequence. But you never gave them that. You held back what mattered most, tucked away, unspoken. And the result? They had to imagine. They had to embellish. They had to construct the shadow of a half-real, half-legend woman with eyes like steel and a heart that never wept. They wrote that you once defeated 6 men alone, that you laughed when they chained you, that you burned an entire ship down after a lover betrayed you. Some of it sounds thrilling, but you know most of it is false. Still, you don't deny it. You stay silent, because you understand. Truth won't save you from the gallows, but a little mystery might keep you alive in the minds of others far longer than a single lifetime. One afternoon, you were led from your cell to prepare for trial. As you passed through the courtyard, you overheard 2 guards talking. They didn't know you could hear. One told a story about you like a ghost tale. I heard she killed her own captain just to take his ship. They say she doesn't fear anything, doesn't cry, doesn't flinch, like a demon in a woman's skin. You didn't react. That wasn't your story. But it wore your shape, crooked yet heavy. One day someone will write your life with ink thick with judgment. They'll turn you into a warning or an example. But the unverified parts, the rumors, the guesses, will keep your name drifting through docks, taverns, fishing boats, and the dreams of those who refuse to live quietly. You don't need to be loved. You just don't want to be forgotten. You once met a frail older woman in prison, nearly toothless, half her hair gone silver. She was jailed for being a witch. No proof. Just whispers. She looked at you a long while, then smiled, gums bare. You know, some rumors. They're not meant to kill us. They're meant to keep us from being erased. You never forgot that. Sometimes, you picture the future. A century from now, maybe someone will tell your story. Not accurately. Not completely. But they'll say to it. And in that story, you'll still be standing at the helm, eyes fixed ahead, sword in hand, hair tangled in the wind. Not a prisoner, not a victim, a symbol. They won't remember how you were interrogated. They'll remember that you didn't beg. They won't quote your answers. They'll say you, even in chains, refused to bow. And that's enough to be worth remembering. Night falls. In your cold cell, you curl in on yourself, not from the chill, but from fatigue. Your back is stiff, and your arms are sore. But in your mind, there's a song. One from childhood, when you'd sit on the roof watching ships come and go. Your mother's voice has long faded into the wind, but the tune remains. You hum it silently, because here, every sound is a risk. But deep down, you know that every story begins with a whisper, and you, even twisted and retold, will still be part of one. Not because of who you were, but because you dared not to be what they wanted you to be. It's not the darkness that frightens you. It's the blur that never fades. You no longer know what time means. Morning and night blend in this stone cell no wider than 2 outstretched arms. The ceiling hangs low, the walls are cold, and mold creeps in blotches. And most importantly, there are no windows. only a narrow slit high above, just enough to remind you that air still exists outside, but not enough to tell if it's raining, if the sun is out, or if the seasons have changed. Living in prison is learning to survive without sensation. The cold seeps slowly through your clothes. The ground beneath you is always damp, even with straw. Your limbs curl tighter each night. One meal is 2 pieces of stale bread and cloudy water in a wooden bowl. Some days, they forget you. Some days, you're the last to receive your share. You don't ask. Don't complain. Here, anyone who speaks only gets a tired shake in return. Each day repeats itself. Sit. Lie down. Breathe. Listen to rats scurry by, then sit again. Once, you walked across ship decks as if treading waves. Now, your steps are confined to 2 square paces. Everything has shrunk. The space, your voice, even yourself. One day, a piece of the wall was chipped off. Beneath the gray stone was a fine crack, like a scar. You stared at it all afternoon as if it might reveal a secret. It didn't. But you kept looking because it was the only change in the day. What drives people mad isn't pain. It's having nothing to hold on to. You begin to count, not time, but sound. The drip of water. 3 drops. Then silence. The clink of metal when the guard's chain shifts. A faint laugh from the cell next door. A female voice, perhaps the only other survivor nearby. You've never seen her, but you know she doesn't have a window either. One night in the dark, you whispered, "Are you still awake?" After a long pause came a reply. "Yeah, still breathing. Nothing more." But that night you slept deeper. Not from warmth, but from knowing you weren't the only one still awake in the dark. Those who lived at sea were used to skies, stars as constant companions. In prison, there is no sky, no direction. You lie on your side, eyes open, sometimes feeling like you're drifting, but with no idea where to. Your mind replays the old deck, the scent of burnt wood, damp canvas, the strain of taut ropes. You remember every sound, every person, even the sting of rain slapping your face like needles. And what scares you isn't the memory, it's the fear. How much longer can you hold on before it all fades like these stone walls? One morning, the guard brings a bowl of porridge. Warmer than usual, no explanation. You sip it carefully as if drinking fire. And you wonder, have you learned to live like someone the world forgot? You were once a captain. Now you feel grateful for warm mush. Something in you cracks, but you don't cry. Here, there's no room for tears. You take a splinter from a broken spoon and scratch a mark into the wall, not to count the days, but as proof that you still exist. The first mark, the day you were locked in. The second, the day you slept dreamlessly. The third, the day you heard real laughter from the next cell. No names, no numbers, just faint scratches in the stone. But they help you fight the nothingness that eats away at every boundary. No one knows who you are, no one visits. But each day, you wake, lean against the cold wall, close your eyes, and imagine that maybe one day, someone will open the door. Not to lead you to judgment, but I want to ask if you still remember the sea. You won't say a word. You'll just smile. Because if you can still smile after so many days without a window, you haven't been completely imprisoned. A small part of you still looks outward, where the light hasn't yet gone out. And that part will outlive the chains. You no longer hope for anyone to be beside you. Not in this place. Not when every breath vanishes into stone. So when she was thrown into the cell next to yours, you just listened. It was a small, light body, but when it hit the stone floor, it sounded like a damp sack of sand. The guard slammed the door without a word. She groaned. Short. Sharp. You didn't speak right away. Here, survivors are the ones who know how to wait. That night, it didn't rain, but the wind slipped hard through the ceiling slits, cold like a thin blade. You heard her cough, hoarse and sparse. No complaints. It's just the reflex of a body running on empty. You spoke softly. Did they hit you? A pause. Then a dry, faint laugh. No. Just asked questions. That sentence, you know it well. In here, everyone is just questioned. But everyone's skin is bruised. Everyone's eyes are swollen. A few days later, the two of you began to talk. They never see each other, only voices across the stone. Each is in a corner. Each is holding themselves together in their way. She used to be a storekeeper on a merchant ship. They got caught trying to flee with silver that wasn't hers. Not a pirate, not a killer. Just someone who dared to decide. You didn't ask her name. She didn't ask who you were either. Here, names matter less than voices. At night, it's enough to know someone replies. You talked about the sea. She spoke of waves. Both of you choose your words carefully, like weaving blankets in the cold. Not woven from memory, but from sensation. The sway of a ship deck, the smell of new rope, the creak of timber underfoot. Small things, but real. One night she asked, "You really held the wheel?" You nodded, knowing she couldn't see. Once, I guided a ship through two reefs the map said were impassable. A long sigh came from the other side. I wish I'd seen that. You smiled faintly. Nothing more was said. No need for many words. Her quiet and steady presence made the prison feel a little less sealed. You knew you weren't the only shadow in the long corridor when you lay down. Once, she sang. Not a sailor's shanty, not a lullaby. It's just a clipped chorus about wind and oars. You closed your eyes, listening to the half-finished lines, as if hearing waves knocking gently against an old hull. People don't survive on scraps or leaking light. They survive through each other. Not through grand gestures, but quiet recognition. I'm not alone. You began sharing your bread with her and sneaking bits through the crack in the wall, stuffing them into the damp corner. Sometimes the ants took it. Sometimes the rats. But when she got it, she didn't say thank you, just stayed silent longer than usual. That was the best thanks you'd ever heard. One night neither of you spoke. A cramp twisted your stomach. Maybe the evening meal had gone bad. You didn't groan. But from the next cell, her voice came soft. Breathe slowly. You did. And the pain ebbed like the tide retreating. You once commanded sailors, but no one ever taught you how to breathe. Last of all, in the dark, in prison, by someone also awaiting a noose. One day you heard the guards say, "Next batch will be tried." It could be you. It could be her. It could be both. No one knew the order, but when you listened to the footsteps fade, you asked gently, "If they call you tomorrow, is there anything you want me to remember for you?" She chuckled, softer than ever before. "Tell who?" "The world's not listening." You thought for a moment, then said, "Doesn't need to listen. I'll remember." You'd never told anyone you needed someone. But when her silence stretched on that night, you whispered her name. No reply. You waited. Long. Cold. Then a breath-light voice answered, "I was just listening to you breathe." You pressed your lips together. Then let out a tiny laugh, quiet but real. For the first time in prison, you felt something stir back to life inside you. Not freedom, not hope, but something smaller and tougher. Allyship. They didn't try you for just one crime. Never just one. Not for you. Piracy? Of course. commanding an outlaw ship, looting, defying the crown, challenging the order, more than enough to earn a rope. But being a woman? That was the part that truly unsettled them. You felt it not in their words, but in their eyes. They looked at you like a misplaced object, not because of what you did, but because of who you were. They could forgive a male pirate, punish him, then forget. But you, your mere existence was a challenge. You once thought the sea was freedom. At sea, no one cared what you were. Only that you could row, command, fight. No one asked if you were a woman. If they did, it was only to know if they should be more cautious. Waves don't care about gender. Storms don't spare the soft. But now, in the courtroom, every gaze pierced through you like you were a puzzle. A woman who dared stand at a ship's helm, steer men, wear trousers, never lower her head. You weren't being judged as a criminal. You were being dissected. A riddle they needed to solve. Why would you do such a thing? Why not marry? Why not sew, cook, and bear children like a normal woman? You sat in that chamber, surrounded by faces both curious and appalled, and understood. The sentence wasn't only for what you did, it was for what you refused to be. The indictment was read out, line by line, like blades slicing still water. The accused, self-identified female. At an undetermined time, seized control of a merchant vessel. Habitually dressed in male garments. Led activities in violation of maritime law. Resisted royal enforcement. Exhibited disregard for gender roles and customs. You listened without blinking, but inside you laughed. Disregard for gender roles. They wrote it like it was a felony, and in their eyes, it was worse than most. Before you were captured, you heard stories of women like you. One burned for riding a horse alone through Market Square. One drowned with stones for laughing too loudly during Mass. Those stories once made you laugh. But now, sitting here, the logic felt cold as the stone beneath your feet. Punishment for people like you is never just that. It's a message, a warning, a whispered threat. Don't be like her. When the judge asked, "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" you looked him straight in the eye, then answered simply, "I have nothing to defend. I only lived the way I knew how." A small ripple moved through the room. You noticed because it wasn't what they wanted to hear. They wanted you to beg, to collapse, to show you'd learned your lesson. But you denied them that satisfaction. When they led you back to your cell, dusk had fallen. Cold wind stung your cheeks. But you felt lighter because you'd said what mattered. Not in defiance, in affirmation. The girl in the next cell waited. When she heard the lock click, she whispered, "Did they hit you?" You replied, "No, but they did something worse." "What?" They looked at me like I shouldn't exist. Silence settled between the two cells. Then her voice rose again, soft as wind skimming a cliffside. "They used to look at me like that, back when I worked on a ship, like I was taking someone else's place." You smiled in the dark. "We took nothing. They just don't know what to do when we stand upright." That night, you dreamed of another trial. No judge. No charges. It's just a quiet deck under moonlight. You stood there, wind threading through your hair. A long line of women stepped from the shadows, each unique. One held a hammer, another a sword, another needle and thread, another with bare hands. They didn't speak. I just looked at you, then nodded, slightly, like a silent recognition. You didn't wake from wind or rats. You woke because you were smiling. Small but real. Though imprisoned, though judged not for crimes but for your gender, one thing remained untouchable. You never bowed your head. And you knew that above all was the greatest crime you'd ever committed. You were taken from your cell before the sky had fully lightened, bare feet on wet, cold stone, the prison shift clinging like damp paper soaked with mist. The chains weren't tight anymore, as if they knew you had nowhere to run. Before entering the courtroom, a guard adjusted your sleeve, not out of courtesy, but to make you look more like someone to be judged than a warrior defeated. The doors opened. The wind from inside carried no warmth. The courtroom wasn't significant. A raised bench for the judge. A few rickety wooden chairs lined up along the sides. A hastily assembled table in the center of the room. They sat you behind it, wrists still shackled. But no one looked at the chains. They looked at your face. The first stares came from the men in black robes in the front row. Their eyes were like locked doors, heavy, firm, and not meant to open. They didn't smile. They didn't speak. They just stared as if trying to confirm that the creature before them was, in fact, a woman. Behind them sat the townsfolk, a few elders, some young women, and several children pulled along by their mothers, likely to be taught a lesson. I thought this happened to step out of step. You didn't look back, but you felt their eyes. They lingered on your hands, face, and missing shoes. You were a curiosity in their world, a living warning. The judge began to read, dry, formal words, familiar. You didn't catch everyone. You focused on the tone, a voice that had already decided your guilt before it opened its mouth. The charges were long: ship theft, attempted murder, masquerading as a man, disturbing public order, corrupting the role of women. Each word is like a stone laid across your back. Not heavy, you were used to weight, but steady, falling like endless rain on an old ship's deck. You didn't object. You didn't explain. Your defense, if one could call him that, didn't bother lifting his head. You simply looked straight ahead, not in defiance, but to keep your spine from bending. Then came the witness. A sailor. Someone who once stood beside you on deck, now standing on the other side. He said you weren't like a woman, that you gave orders like a man, that the crew followed you more out of fear than respect. You didn't flinch, but something in your chest tightened. This man once shared the last water bottle with you on a 3-week voyage without land, who once called you the ship's last lucky wind, who sat beside you as your crew nearly died in a storm. Now he didn't look at you. He looked at the ground, then at the judge. His gaze searched for somewhere safer. A child whimpered in the back. Its mother pulled it close and clamped a hand over its mouth. You didn't turn, but you could picture the hand and warning glance. Not out of fear of you, but fear the child might see something in you it wasn't ready to understand. When asked if you had anything to say, you stood. The chains clinked softly. You raised your eyes to the bench, then glanced at the crowd. No speech, no plea, just one simple sentence. I don't ask for mercy. I just want to hear my own voice one last time. A ripple moved through the room. No one understood what you meant, but they remembered your voice. Low, even, neither sharp nor soft. A woman in the back bowed her head. You didn't know her, but that one gesture made the cold sting a little less. When the court recessed for deliberation, the guards led you back. Passing a narrow mirror in the hallway, you caught a glimpse of your reflection. Pale face, tangled hair, cracked lips, eyes hollow like cave walls. You didn't recognize yourself, but you didn't regret it. Because in that reflection, something still refused to bow. You sat on the cell floor, leaning back against the wall, your head slightly tilted, and night hadn't come. But the light was already fading. like the last flicker of a dying oil lamp. You wondered, if you'd been a man, would today have ended differently? If you spoke cruder, had no breasts, carried a voice like gravel, would they have judged you as a pirate or paraded you as a freak? You didn't have an answer. Only this. Today, in that courtroom, no one looked at your crimes. They looked at your gender. You weren't just trying to take a ship. You were tried for living like you never needed permission. There were no screams, no furious crowd demanding blood, no thunderous condemnation like you always imagined a death sentence would carry. It's just a cold stone chamber. A few nods, a gavel striking a worn wooden table, and then silence. Not the gentle silence of a ship at night, when the crew sleeps and only the waves murmur against the hull. This silence was thick, tense, like swamp mud pressed to your chest, making breathing hard. No one stood to object. No one clapped in approval. Just eyes that refused to meet yours. The sentence was spoken in a flat, dry voice, like someone reading a shopping list. The prisoner shall be executed next week. Public hanging. No pardon. You weren't surprised. You'd been ready for this for a long time. But you weren't prepared for how it would be said. Cleanly, calmly. No sweat. No blood. Your death had been filed like a line item in a report. No one needed to hate you anymore. They only had to agree in silence. As you were led from the room, you passed the rows of spectators one last time. No jeers, no curses. They simply turned away. Some stared at the floor. Others pretended to brush the dust from their sleeves. A few clutched their children tighter, as if to shield them from the silhouette passing by. The silhouette of a woman who had stepped beyond what was allowed. That turning away chilled you more than the chains. The girl in the next cell, the one who used to hum lullabies to you at night, called softly when she heard your steps return. What did they say? You answered simply, "They're finished speaking." She asked nothing more. A little later, from her cell, she began to sing. That same broken song, no beginning, no end. Not for you, not for anyone. Just to keep something warm between those lime-cold walls. You sat down, eyes fixed on the crack in the stone you once used to count days. No need to mark anything now. There are no more days left to count. What struck you as strange was this. You weren't afraid of dying. You were afraid of being forgotten. Afraid no one would tell your story later. No one would remember you as someone who once held the helm, stared down storms, loved, fought, and took responsibility without apologizing. You didn't need forgiveness, but you wanted to be remembered as you truly were. In the public imagination, pirate trials are loud. The crowd cheers. The accused shouts. The judge bangs the table, his beard trembling with rage. But your sentence came wrapped in silence, a paralyzing kind of silence, because it leaves no room for protest. It's simply erasure, as if they had already agreed to delete you from collective memory, even before the rope could do its job. You thought of your mother, the one who taught you to tie your hair tight for work so the wind wouldn't toss it about. She never imagined you'd go to sea. But if she saw you now, she probably wouldn't cry. She'd look at you and say something quiet. You lived more than they allowed. And to you, that would be the most beautiful sentence ever passed. That night, the cold came early. There was no rain, but the air carried the scent of the sea from afar. You couldn't see the ocean, but you knew it was still there, dark, salty, and patient. You sat quietly, arms around your knees, eyes closed. And in that darkness, you dreamed. Not of mercy, not of escaping the cell, not of vengeance. You simply dreamed of being back on the old deck, standing in the early mist, one hand on the helm, hearing the ropes creak in the wind. No one spoke. No one judged. Only the waves. And you. Just yourself. Even if only in a dream. They said you would be executed at dawn, not out of mercy, but because early morning meant fewer onlookers, less trouble. And when the wind is still cold, the neck breaks faster, cleaner. You didn't care what time they chose. Time no longer held meaning. You only counted the steps toward the end, and how people looked at you as you passed. That final night in your cell dragged like a ship with torn sails. You didn't sleep. The girl in the next cell didn't either. Neither of you spoke, but you knew the other was awake. That was enough. Near morning, someone came to shave your head. They didn't ask your name, didn't say hello. They just did their task as if you were an object being decommissioned. Hair was soaked in the sea wind, and salt was gathered in a cloth and carried off. No explanation. No one kept a part of you. No mementos. No messages were left behind. No one needed to remember who you were. They brought you out when the sky was still gray. A small group waited. Not many. Familiar faces, guards, court clerks, the sailor who testified against you. No one brought flowers. No one read prayers. Your hands were bound behind you, the rope grazing your throat. Just enough to remind you your breath was no longer entirely your own. A makeshift wooden platform stood in the square. Old. It was probably used before, and likely for someone like you. A guard once said the last man to hang here was a bearded thief who asked for one last smoke. You asked for nothing. You didn't need a ritual, only to keep your head held high. On the way to the scaffold, you saw a boy, 10 years old maybe, in a gray tunic, holding his mother's hand, eyes wide, not afraid, just curious. You looked at him. He looked back. In that moment, you saw something true, a human being, fully present, not judging, not looking away. You smiled, not for anyone, just because you chose to. He didn't smile back, but he didn't look away until his mother pulled him along. No one said your name as you stepped onto the platform. They simply said, "The prisoner shall be hanged by order of the court." No name, no biography, no past. You, who had once lived, loved, fought, seized every day at sea, were now reduced to 2 words. The prisoner. The wood beneath your feet bowed slightly. Beneath that, nothing. Above, the rope waited. The executioner didn't meet your eyes as the noose was slipped around your neck. You stood still, chin slightly lifted, eyes open. Not out of pride, just too tired to bow. Footsteps shifted below like waves brushing a wooden hull. No farewell, no wreaths, no one near enough to say you had once been worth something. Just you, the rope, and the cold morning wind. In your final moment, you didn't think of death. You thought of the ship. The sail is full of wind, the helm in your hands, the scent of rope grease, the laughter of the old friend cleaning his gun with his sleeve. A meal of salted fish was shared between the 5, all pretending not to be hungry, but eating every last grain. You thought of your first sword fight, trembling hands, clenched lips, but eyes fixed ahead. You didn't think of any man. No apologies. No regrets over what you should have done differently. You remembered only this. You lived the way they never allowed you to. When the floor dropped and the rope pulled tight, it didn't go dark immediately. There was a strange moment, suspended in space and time, when you felt lighter, no longer bound by title, gender, or law. Just a figure, upright, clear, and taken to the end. No flowers were placed at the foot of the gallows. By evening, the guards cut you down and buried you behind the prison, in a patch of earth where nothing grew, a shallow hole, no marker, no name. But that night, in a tavern near the docks, someone said, "I once saw her standing on deck like a goddess, face calm, eyes to the sky, hand pointing forward, and the whole crew followed her through the waves." Someone laughed. "A woman? Stealing a ship? Nonsense." The storyteller took a sip, then shook his head. "Believe it or not, but if I had to die, I'd want to die like her." No flowers, but someone remembered, and that was enough. They once said that if you were pregnant, you wouldn't be hanged. Immediately. Not out of mercy. Not because they feared the loss of a life, but because the law did not permit executing a woman who carried a child. It sounded humane, but in reality, it was merely a delay. A postponement, like when rain is about to fall, but you still have to stoke the fire under a pot that hasn't yet boiled. In prison, rumors spread like cold drafts. A woman in the next wing had once been sentenced to hang, until the prison physician examined her and declared, "She's with child." And just like that, everything halted. She was moved to a separate cell. Interrogations eased, given slightly more food. They didn't pardon her, but they waited. Waited until the child was born and then tightened the rope. You heard the story and didn't know whether to feel hope or fear. You once thought that if you ever ended up in that situation, you'd laugh in their faces. You'd never get pregnant just to buy yourself a few more weeks. But deep down, you also knew, in desperation, people don't live by pride. There was once a girl in your cell, pale skin, curly hair, a voice like a tiny bell. She'd been caught as part of a coastal ship raiding crew. She cried as if she'd never learned how to hold back when sentenced. A few weeks later, she stopped crying. Then she whispered to you. She was pregnant. You didn't ask who the father was. She didn't say. She said, "At least the baby can keep me here for one more season." 1 season, 3 months, 90 days without the gallows. She considered it a reward. They didn't check thoroughly. They wouldn't risk executing someone who might stir a moral scandal if you claimed it and showed signs. Some faked pregnancy, stuffed fabric under their shirts, drank wild herb brews to swell their bellies. Others made a mistake, then realized that mistake was their last salvation. Motherhood wasn't something respected here. The child had no name, no papers, no known father, but its presence was enough to make the men with the hammers hesitate, at least for a little while. You often wondered, would you ever carry a child just to survive? The question disturbed you. You, who once aimed a pistol at your enemy, crossed through storms, and commanded 10 drunken men, now sat thinking of a swollen belly as your final weapon. And yet, in the still of the night, as the wind whispered through the cracks and owls called in the distance, you thought, if I'm alive, I can see one more morning. Inhale air again. Remember the deck of my ship one more time. And maybe that was enough. The girl gave birth in the middle of a winter night. No midwife. Only an older prisoner, a woman who'd been a mother once, sat beside her. The first cry of the child echoed like a forbidden thing in that prison. Soft, thin, but so alien it made even the guards pause on their rounds. She didn't live long after. Died of infection. The baby was taken away. No one knew who, if anyone, adopted it. No one asked its name. A week later, she was executed, right on schedule. You heard the story and felt your throat tighten. Not because of her death, but because of the silence that followed. A silence as if she had never existed. As if they had simply been waiting for the right moment to cross a name off a list. As if the child, though it saved a life, was worth nothing more than a delay. You lay still, hands clasped, imagining your belly swelling and imagining how people might look at you differently. Not because of your gender, but because of a shape rising at your core. Not as power, not as guilt, but as proof you were harboring a life, and you lived longer because of that. Ironically, for people like you, death is always the default sentence. But life must be negotiated. Negotiated through pain, through a swollen body, through enduring 9 months in a place where no one is allowed to smile. You think, if someday someone offered you a chance to live, even for just one more season by bearing a child, you might consider it. Not out of hope, not from fear of death, but because you understand a heartbeat might keep you here longer than any appeal ever could. Even if just temporarily, even if the price was your own body. Because in the world you inhabit, even survival must come with a reason. Even if that reason lies quietly under your skin, kicking in silence, and will never know the name of its mother. They always said, act weak, and they won't dare to kill you. You heard that from another female prisoner, a former maid in some lord's castle. She survived 2 trials, not because she was innocent, but because she knew when to cry. I knew when to collapse. She knew how to say, I'm just a foolish woman, with the perfect tremble. And indeed, they didn't execute her. Not immediately. You thought about that at night, arms wrapped around your empty belly, back pressed to the damp wall. Wondering, could you bow your head, shed tears, admit fault, just to live a few more weeks? You were used to giving orders and having the final word in a room, and used to everyone waiting in silence for your finger to point the way. But none of that kept you warm when you were chained. None of it gave you breath when the rope tightened around your neck. And then you asked yourself, not in the voice of a captain, but of someone whose time was running out, if I cry, would they spare me? Pity is soft, slippery, white like silk. They might wrap it around your neck instead of rope. But once you're no longer entertaining, that silk will tighten just the same. The trap isn't in the moment of mercy. It's in the illusion, the belief that they genuinely think you're worth sparing, just because you cried. One night you dreamed of another courtroom. This time, you knelt. You apologized. You said everything they wanted to hear. I was wrong. I was misled. I didn't know how to command. You dreamed they pardoned you, released you, let you live. But in the dream, you didn't return to your ship. No one welcomed you back. You walked alone down a windowless road, and everyone who looked at you knew you'd survived. Not because you were brave, but because you had bowed. And that feeling hurt more than death. You knew. If you wanted to live longer, you could pretend. A few feeble words, a tired gesture, a shaky voice invoking elderly parents, or the dream of marriage. But you couldn't. Not because you were stronger than others, but because you'd lived your life never asking for permission. Once, the prison warden, a rough man but not entirely cruel, handed you a bowl of water and murmured, "If you said you were forced, maybe they'd go easy." You looked at him, not with anger, not with sarcasm. You simply asked, "If I said that, would I still be me?" He didn't reply. I just walked away. That question wasn't for him. It was for you. Compassion never truly saved anyone. People may weep at your story. I may feel sorry you were caught. But when judgment comes, what they want is closure. It's a digestible ending. A picture of a woman who repented. They don't believe in redemption but need a reason to feel less cruel. You could give them that, but you don't. One morning, you were summoned by officials. An opportunity for clemency. You knew the game. They wanted you to write an apology. Admit you were manipulated. Say you just followed. You were misled by men. The paper lay in front of you, ink ready. You took the pen, wrote nothing, returned it, not out of pride, not because you wanted to die, but because you wouldn't let someone else rewrite your life into a cheap play, where you lived, but no longer as yourself. Pity is the softest trap you've ever seen. No thorns, no fangs, just gentle words. Bow, and we'll spare you. But you were used to walking through storms bareheaded, and used to breathing through an open chest. Used to let the sea beat you bloody, and still not kneeling. How could you willingly prostrate yourself before those who've never lived the way you have? You didn't choose to die. You simply refused to live on someone else's terms. Even if it costs you the warmth of your neck, even if they call you stubborn, foolish, proud, even if no one remembers that you stood tall until the end. But you know, among all the painful choices, you never fell into the gentlest trap in human history. Pity, for those no longer allowed to stand tall. It wasn't the judge's gaze that unsettled you, nor the guards, nor the executioners. Men so used to watch people die that they no longer blink. It was the eyes behind you, the eyes of the other women. They said nothing, but you felt it, clearly. On the day you were led to the gallows, you passed a long row of female prisoners. No one called out, no one waved, no one whispered, "Rest in peace." They just stood, leaned against the bars, watching. An older woman bowed her head. A younger one covered her mouth. A pregnant one stared without blinking. No one cried. No one smiled. No one dared to say, "You were brave." Yet in their eyes, you saw both admiration and resentment, because you hadn't begged. You didn't use your belly to buy time. You didn't pretend to be weak, didn't kneel at the courthouse gates, or say the lines they expected from a proper woman, and that made them uncomfortable. Not because you were wrong, but because you did what they didn't dare. The silence between women of the same fate was the heaviest thing you ever carried. You had once lived among a ship full of men, yet you never felt as alone as you did walking past a row of women's cells and hearing nothing. What did they see in you? A point of pride? A symbol? Or a threat? Because you stood tall, which made others bow, even when they didn't want to. Because you dared to die without kneeling. And that made those who lived on their knees feel exposed. You weren't a mirror, but your existence forced them to look at themselves, and they didn't like what they saw. The night before your execution, a scrap of paper slipped through a wall crack. The handwriting was clumsy, maybe written in charcoal. "You are not alone." No name, no well wishes. No one claimed it. You read it, then burned it. Not from fear, but because you wanted to keep it for yourself, hidden in your heart where no one else could touch it. Because even in a world this cold, a sentence like that, if discovered, could cost someone dearly. The next morning, a gray-haired woman was marched past your cell. She looked at you, lips pressed tight, not with scorn, not with pity, but with acknowledgement. You nodded. She didn't nod back, but a step later she glanced over her shoulder once more. Then I kept walking. That was enough. You didn't need to be loved. You only needed one person, just one, to think. She didn't bow. And maybe I won't have to either. Not today. Not in prison. But someday, somewhere, they'll remember you when they're outside these stone walls. Not because you were a pirate. Not because you were a woman. But because you made it to the end without dropping yourself. People like to tell stories of female heroes as women who were tricked, trapped, and pushed too far. They're not used to women who choose to live differently, deliberately, clearly, and without apology. And that's why you were judged more harshly than anyone else. You weren't a victim. You weren't a symbol. You were just yourself. And for that alone, you were worth hanging. Men's eyes can hold desire or hatred. But women's eyes, they reflect. They compare. They ask the question no one speaks aloud. If I were her, what would I do? And most of them wouldn't have done what you did. So they stayed silent. Not out of hate, but because you reminded them. They once had a choice and didn't take it. You don't ask them to remember your name. You only hope that one day, when they walk out through the prison gate, stand before the sea, or in front of a modest stove, or across from another cold-eyed interrogator, they'll think of you, not as a woman who was hanged, but as one who stood, knowing exactly what it would cost. And in one small moment, maybe they too won't bow. Here is the English translation of your beautifully written passage. Something strange happens when you know for sure you're about to die. Not fear, not regret, but a silence deeper, longer, and stranger than any wind you've ever heard. Like cleaning out an old ship's cabin, throwing away rotting crates, folding salt-stained maps that no longer hold their lines. Not because you hate the past, but because you want to see it one last time before you go. You started cleaning your memories that night. No one told you to, but your body knew. Your heart knew. When they closed, your eyes weren't closing to sleep, but to inventory. You remembered your first voyage. The wind is too strong. Your stomach flipping like it had been dropped into a bottomless barrel. You didn't eat for 3 days, but still clung to the rigging, refusing to give up. The captain laughed, saying, "This girl doesn't puke and doesn't know fear." You just nodded, thinking, "I genuinely don't." I never learned how. You remembered the first night you killed someone. A short stab, quick. There was no dramatic spray of blood, as the stories said. Just a breath caught between two crashing waves. He tried to do something he shouldn't, and you didn't apologize for ending it. Afterward, you vomited. Not from guilt, but because for the first time your hand had touched the line between life and death. Something had been pulled from you. Not mercy, but the last shred of innocence. You remembered your closest friend on the ship, another woman, also arrested for theft, and for laughing too loud. You two used to lie on your backs, staring at the underside of the sails, counting misplaced nails. She was always the first to puke in rough waters, but the last to leave her post when a fight broke out. She died in an ambush. You were the one who closed her eyes. After that, you never sang again. You remembered the glow of oil lamps on the dock when your ship came into port at night. The scent of burnt wood, cheap wine, and the unwashed sweat of sailors who hadn't bathed in 3 weeks. You remembered the nights you couldn't sleep. Not because of noise, but because of the terrifying quiet between two storms. You remembered the sound of footsteps on the deck, a sound that, even now, still echoes behind your eyelids like an endless tune. You folded each memory like old clothes, not to throw away, but to pack, your final luggage. You had no family, no husband, no children, no will. What you left behind was a story, no name, no narrator. There is no clear ending, but if someone listens carefully, they might still hear it in the sea breeze. On the way, people glance when a strange woman steps onto a ship. No one dares stop her. The girl who used to sing to you in the next cell, she was moved a few days ago. No one said where. You didn't ask. You didn't need to. You had learned how to say goodbye without words. But sometimes, you still hear her voice in memory. A soft, half-remembered lullaby. The wind sleeps beside the hull. I wait tangled in rope. You don't remember the rest. But those 2 lines are enough. Enough to remind you. Someone once stood beside you in your quietest moment. The night before the hanging, you didn't sleep. You didn't pray. They didn't knock for the guards. You just lay there, breathing softly, counting what was left. A name no one remembers correctly. Hands that once steered a ship through storms. Eyes that never turned away under threat. A back that never bent knelt. And a story you knew would never be told right. You once dreamed of a place to return to. But now you understand, the sea was the only place you ever belonged. No flags, no borders. There is no room for anyone who needs permission to live. Only wind, and you, once part of it. When the first rooster crowed in the distance, you sat up. Not afraid, not regretful, not proud, just ready. You rubbed your palms and looked up at them one last time, and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, life, for giving me a body that defied every law." Then you stepped out of your memory, back straight, shoulders light. There is nothing left to fold. The sky hadn't fully lightened when the guard came to unlock the door. No words, no summons, just the familiar, coarse sound of the iron bolt sliding loose. He looked at you, then away as if unwilling to memorize your face again. You stood up, slowly, without staggering. You didn't lean against the wall. I didn't ask where you were going. You already knew, and they knew you knew. It was a kind of silent agreement between the one leading and the one who wouldn't be coming back. On the way through the prison yard, you saw the sky growing pale, just enough light to make everything visible but not enough to feel warm. The cold air clung to your neck, your spine. You didn't shiver, not out of defiance but because every sense had pulled inward, leaving only a quiet awareness waiting to be closed. 2 guards walked in front, one behind. You are in the middle. Every stone beneath your feet seemed to know your name. Each step is familiar, as if you'd walked this path long ago, in dreams, imaginings, or other stories. The great gate creaked open. Dark wood, rusted hinges. Before you was the execution square, the place where, in a few minutes, every eye would turn toward you. Where they wanted you to become an ending, an illustration. No one said anything to you. No one asked, "Any last words?" No one offered, "Would you like to write a letter?" Maybe because they knew you wouldn't speak. Maybe because they were afraid of what you'd say. They didn't cover your head. No one blindfolded you. The executioner said just one thing. "Step up." You did. The damp wood creaked under your feet. A single, slight sound, but one that echoed long. You didn't tremble. Just tilted your head slightly, looking far across the square. There were a few people gathered, some curious, some hoping to watch that woman die. Some were unsure why they were there, just knowing something big was happening that morning. You didn't blame them. Everyone is a spectator in someone else's life. You felt the rope touch the skin of your neck. It's softer than you expected, musty smelling, like the rope once used to moor your ship at port. Only this time, not to anchor, but to end. From above, the sky let down a few drops of mist, cold. You looked up. No stars, just a pale, foggy expanse, like the sea when it's blanketed in morning fog. No shore, no compass, no way forward. Only yourself. The executioner asked, "Want to say any last words?" You thought for a moment. Then shake your head, not because you had nothing to say, but because everything is necessary. You've already lived it. What hadn't been said no longer needed to be. Someone in the crowd cleared their throat, a slight sound, but sharp. You glanced over. A woman, about 40, wearing rough brown cloth, plain face. But her eyes didn't match the rest. She didn't pity you. She didn't despise you. She looked at you as a person, someone standing where she knew she might have stood had she ever dared to go one step further. You gave a slight nod, not gratitude. It is just a farewell to someone brave enough to look directly. No drum roll, no sentence is repeated, just a nod from the signaler. And you knew. It was time. You closed your eyes, not in fear, but to listen, to the wind, to the creak of wood, to the slowing beat of your heart, inch by inch. No thoughts, no resistance, no prayer. Just one final breath, drawn deep into your chest, held tightly, as if to clutch one last heartbeat before release. And you were ready, for the emptiness beneath your feet to open, for the ending, without thunder, without grandeur, without glory, only a straight spine to the very end. Because to you, that was enough. To live a life no one else had to narrate, and to die without bowing to anyone. Your death was never recorded in the history books. No ink ever told who you were, what you did, or how you lived. Perhaps there was a single line if someone patient enough were to dig. On the 12th, a female prisoner hanged. Pirate. No appeal. That was it. No name, no age, origin unknown. You, who once crossed the open sea, commanded men, dared to live without asking permission, were now folded neatly into a small box on a yellowing sheet of paper. And even that box, sometimes, was omitted in later copies. No one brought flowers to the place you were buried. No one raised a marker, a shallow pit behind the prison wall, unmarked, buried like trash, covered like dust. And then, the rain came. A week later, no one remembered there had ever been anyone there. But the strange thing is, you didn't disappear. Your name wasn't included in the documents, but it began to appear in stranger places. They spoke of a dark-haired woman, hanged with her eyes still open. Another said, a lady captain who gave a smile before dying that made the guards shiver. Some even whispered you escaped, somehow, and now lived in a fishing village, healing with herbs and staring down officials without a word. No one told it the same, no one told it right, but all spoke of the same woman who wouldn't bow. The truth was that no one stood to recount who you were. No descendants, no biographer, no journalist thought you were worth remembering. What you had were whispers, on ships, in taverns, during laundry at riversides, tiny stories, unverifiable, but spreading like smoke. A child growing up by the docks hears her grandmother say, "There once was a woman captain. They executed her for not bowing, but even the waves never broke her gaze." A young woman hesitating before running from an arranged marriage hears an old seamstress mutter, "I once saw her on the gallows, but her back was straight." Since then I remind myself, don't bend. You're no longer here, but you never truly left. People love to tell stories of women who were weak, deceived, misled, and then saved. You were different. You weren't saved. You never begged to be. You died as you lived. No screaming, no explaining, no asking for help. And that, the very thing that erased you from the official record, also kept you alive in the mouths of the living. Not officially, not on paper, but real. If your name existed, it was misspelled by those who couldn't read. But they knew your spirit. They knew how you looked straight at the rope. They knew you didn't kneel. They knew the difference between a condemned criminal and a woman who refused to deny herself. And in a world obsessed with polishing every story into a perfect face, you are the quiet crack at the mirror's edge, jarring, imperfect, but proper. Later, someone would write an academic essay on women in pirate history. Your name would be missing, but there'd be a minor footnote. Some female prisoners were executed without clear records. Rumors persist of a woman who captained a ship, but nothing confirmed. And so, you were officially non-existent, and still mentioned. A kind of presence that needed no proof. You didn't need a statue or a song. Only that someone, once in their life, might look up at an empty deck and picture you there. Hair tangled in the wind, hand on the wheel, gaze unflinching. And that would be enough. You lived as if no one had written you down, and you died as if you never needed to be remembered. But every time someone speaks of the woman who stood tall when the world said she shouldn't, that's you. People don't remember your name. They remember the shape of someone like you. No one recalls your hair color, the shade of your eyes, your height, or your voice. But in every story, you're standing in the storm, back unbent, hands steady. Sometimes with a sword, sometimes without. Sometimes pregnant, sometimes a hardened spinster. Sometimes it is a condemned woman. Sometimes the one who slipped away from the blade at the last second. You became a face that didn't need to be painted clearly. A person not referred to by name, but by stance. The woman dragged into the village square for fleeing her husband for daring to wear trousers to the market quietly said, "If you want to punish me, do it like they did the nameless captain." No one quite understood her words. But the crowd hesitated, and she was spared. Not because she was right, but because someone, long ago, also refused to apologize. And people still remembered how that ended. Blurry, incomplete, but remembered. In a small harbor town, there's a tavern with a charcoal sketch hanging on the wall. Faint lines, an unrecognizable woman standing alone on a ship's deck in the rain. No label, no name. The innkeeper says, "Just for decoration." But whenever someone claims women can't captain ships, he points at the sketch and chuckles. It's there to remember, not to believe. That's how legends begin, not with complete truth, just enough feeling. You, someone who once breathed, hungered, and smiled at a roadside child, are now a symbol. A symbol born of the things you refused to do. You didn't beg. You didn't kneel. You didn't deny who you were. You never wrote a memoir. But every no you chose became a storyline for someone else. There's a girl whose name has been forgotten in a coastal village. She grew up hearing stories about you. She never learned to read. I never knew who you were. But she ran when her parents tried to marry her to a thrice-widowed salt trader. Someone asked her, "Where do you think you're going?" She said, "Anywhere, as long as there's wind, and I don't have to bow." No one taught her that line, but she'd heard of you. Not by name, but through the memory of a memory. You became a shadow with no portrait, but the longest shadow in people's minds. Everyone has been you, for a moment. That time, they walked out with a decision that others called foolish. At that time, they refused to bow to power. That time, they laughed when they were supposed to cry. You live in small gestures, a nod, a turned back, a grip on a hidden blade, more than in statues or history books. Some have tried to rewrite your tale, with ink, with rules. Some say you were likely a deceived victim. Others claim she was a villain dressed as a feminism. But no one agrees. No one can hold you in a paragraph, because you don't fit any definition. You are an absence no one accepts, but no one dares erase. Legends thrive in ambiguity. You left behind the perfect kind, intense enough to send chills, silent sufficient to elude certainty. You weren't the first woman to be hanged, but you were the first whose death no one dared tell in a single voice. Everyone has a version of you, and no one is sure they're right. That's how you survived, longer than any neck ever could. You were once a person. Now, you have a choice. Every time someone stands between surviving and bowing, they wonder, could I be like her? No two answers are the same, but they all think of you. Though they don't know your name and can't picture your face, you left this world with a steady step and left behind a path for others to follow if they dare. Not a castle, not a library, not even a courtroom or a church. It was the seaside tavern where you lived the longest, where wooden mugs overflowed, where laughter tangled with curses, where sweat and grilled fish mingled in the air, and where, once night fell, someone would always start with a familiar line. Hey, anyone told the kids the story of her yet? No one asked who her was, because everyone knew. The storyteller was usually an old sailor, hands scarred, eyes fogged from salt. He wasn't good at stories. He stuttered and drank more than he spoke. But whenever he mentioned you, his voice stilled, like drawing an old sword, not to show off but to remember. He'd say, I saw her once, being led across the dock, rain falling, her hands chained behind her back. But her back, still straight, didn't hunch from the cold, didn't look at anyone, didn't need anyone to look. The children giggled. Then what happened? He squinted. Then they hanged her. But no one dared carve her name on the stone. A little boy whispered, were they scared she'd come back? The sailor laughed. No. They were scared people would want her to. Not everyone believed the story. Some said, it's all made up. Some sneered, pirates deserve to die. But some said nothing. They listened, drank, and quietly left with a different look in their eyes. Not because the story was factual, but because it felt true. True in the way everyone once wished they could have lived like that, even just once. You, the woman no one carved a name for, became the reason others began thinking about themselves. A barmaid heard your story every night, never spoke. But one day she quit and joined a fishing boat. When asked why, she simply said, I'm tired of bowing too much. No one dared name you. But they knew. Your story was the last she heard before she left. In another tavern, a rusty knife hangs on the wall. The innkeeper says, that was hers. Of course, it wasn't. But no one wanted to disprove it. They let it hang. A quiet reminder. Someone once dared to hold a blade, even when the world said, women shouldn't. The blade isn't sharp. The handle's worn, but its edge slices into memory. Soft, slow, persistent. One time, a drunken merchant scoffed mid-crowd. You people talk about her like a saint. She was just a pirate, someone replied. Not loudly, not angrily. Yeah, but at least she never apologized for living. The merchant fell silent, because there's nothing left to say after that. You never needed a statue, nor a song, nor an annual vigil. Just a space in the corner of a tavern, where someone still remembers how you stood without bowing. It doesn't have to be complete. It doesn't have to be accurate. It just needs one person to remember. That once, there was someone like you, a woman who was taken without resistance, whose hands were bound but whose gaze was not, who was sentenced but never bowed to beg approval. When the mugs are empty, the fire dims, the last patron leaves, and the night folds over the tavern roof, you're still there. In the final story, rasped, unpolished, but real. A piece of you lingers in the last sip of the day's drink. Another in the hoarse laugh of an old sailor remembering the sea. And the most significant part lives in the young ones. Who doesn't know your name? I'm not sure you were real, but hear something stir inside them every time they're about to lower their heads. Stand up. She never knelt. No one remembers your face clearly, but many have seen you in their dreams, not as a ghost appearing suddenly in the middle of the night, but as a quiet figure standing on the edge, just before the storm hits, when the ship refuses to move, or when someone stands at a crossroads, unsure whether to turn back or go on. You don't speak, you just stand there, hands gripping an invisible helm. Your gaze doesn't force, but it doesn't allow people to look away. A girl in a fishing village dreamed she was standing on the deck of an empty ship. No sailors, no direction. The sea was pitch black and the wind howled. She panicked. She didn't know what to do. Then she looked to the side of the ship. You were there, just watching. No instructions, no outstretched hand, just standing, as if asking, "What will you choose?" She woke up, heart racing. The next day she told her mother, "I'm not getting married." No one believed her. No one asked why, but she knew. The figure beside the railing had reminded her that to live honestly sometimes only takes not turning back. A middle-aged man, once a correctional officer, once someone who watched people be led to die but never remembered their faces, dreamed of you walking down from the gallows, calm, as if you'd never been sentenced. You passed by him without a glance or word, leaving behind only the scent of salt and gunpowder. When he woke, he quit his job. I bought an old boat. No one understood. He just said, "I once saw someone walk to their death without bowing their head. I don't want to guard doors for people like that anymore." You no longer appear in stories or songs. You appear in posture, in dreams. A straight back, a steady hand, a kind of presence that needs no preaching, no title. It slips into early mornings when someone can't get up, moments they almost compromise, and times when they're about to say, "I'm sorry" for something that wasn't their fault. That's when you appear, not as a person, but as a lingering memory pressing against their chest. Don't do it. She didn't. Some call you the sea ghost. Others say, the nameless captain. A child once drew you, just a curved figure standing in waves. No face, no details. But everyone knew it was you. The world forgets your name, but they remember how you walked. Not hurried, not hesitant, needing no one to lead you. You walked as if you knew exactly where you were going, even if that path ended in a noose. And that walk clings to the edges of other people's sleep. No blood, no tears, just a question that never fades. If it were me, would I have dared walk like her? You didn't come back to life, but you never truly died either. No one can kill the memory of someone who walked into their ending without fear of endings. You don't need to be worshipped. In a world built for bending, you just need someone to remember there was once a woman who didn't know how to kneel. Here is the English translation of your piece, with correct grammar and natural flow, preserving the poetic and emotional tone. They don't tell your story in books. They tell it by the village well, while hanging laundry, while mending fishing nets, while rocking a baby to sleep, eyes still fixed on the drifting clouds outside the window. These stories have no beginning, no end, just scattered fragments. Long ago, there was a woman who never begged for mercy, or she died on the gallows but never bowed, and no one asks, who was she? Because they don't need to. Everyone knows who she is, even if no one remembers her name. You became a whisper, not loud, not dazzling, just a red thread gently passed down through generations, held by no one, remembered by all. A grandmother tells her granddaughter, punished for speaking too loudly at the dinner table, "Speak clearly, child." There was once a woman who died just because she refused to lower her voice. A young wife, before stepping into her divorce hearing, turns to her child and says, "I won't cry. just like her. The child doesn't know who her is, but years later she'll remember that face, and the name no one needed to say aloud. You became the straight back in a legend, never hunched, never retreating. Children hear the story and never ask, wasn't she afraid? Because the story itself is the answer. You don't need anyone to recall you by name. At a crossroads in their life, you only need someone to remember that it's possible to live without bowing. A little girl gets punished for climbing the rail of a fishing boat. Her mother, angry, threatens to spank her. The grandmother just chuckles. Let her be. She reminds me of someone I once heard about. The mother shakes her head. That woman was hanged. The grandmother replies, yes, but that death is worth more than 1,000 lives spent bent. The girl doesn't fully understand, but she knows she was spared, not out of luck, but because someone once lived in a way that refused to be forgotten. They don't build statues of you, but they raise you through words, stories shared around the fire, whispers during rainy nights, advice before someone sets off on a journey. A poor father tells his daughter before she leaves home, keep your back straight, like her. The daughter asks, like who? He doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. You are no longer just a person. You are a reminder. There are moments when society presses women down, into the kitchen, into silence, into resignation. But in those very moments, your name returns, not to roar in rebellion, but to quietly move someone in the crowd to rise and say, I don't agree. No one taught them that phrase. It's just that somewhere inside them, a whisper from a long-gone generation still lingers. A whisper from you. You didn't win, you didn't survive, you left behind nothing but the sound of breaking bones, an unmarked grave, and stories told in fragments. But you planted a seed no one can uproot, and that seed blooms whenever someone stands for themselves, even if no one stands with them. You are why no one stands alone when they dare to keep their back straight. In a world that prefers deaths that are quiet and easy to accept, you were the death that refused to behave. And that's why you cannot be erased. You lived once with such clarity that even those not yet born will have to reconsider how they breathe. No bells, no history books, just one person, somewhere far away in a quiet, ordinary moment, suddenly hearing a voice in their mind. She never apologized. And they press their lips together, straighten their spine, and keep walking. Not because you lived long, but because you lived at the right time. Once, for many. You have no statue, no book bears your name. But somewhere, in decaying old records, some lines make people pause. A dash, a name left unfinished, a blank space between two fully detailed verdicts. And the scribe, though not meaning to, left you behind as a silence that refused to be closed. In an old monastery ledger, one entry reads, Friday, execution of a woman, name not recorded, crime, piracy, sentence, hanging. Below it, in faded ink, a different hand had written, she died but did not bow. No one knows who wrote it. It didn't follow the official script. It broke church grammar, but it remains, like a heartbeat echoing in a tale meant to end. While copying court records, a man who works in an old printing shop once said he found a page with no name, only a sketch of a small ship, tilted to the right, inside a glow with no source, no legal seal, no caption. But everyone who saw it felt something wasn't finished. A person was hanged, but not erased. Not all scribes are neutral. Some hated you. They scrubbed your name from the list. Wrote, female convict of unknown origin. I erased the reason for your sentence, leaving only improper conduct, unbecoming of women. But that omission, instead of erasing you, made you clearer. Because among hundreds of detailed deaths, only yours was met with silence. And it's that silence people remember. Some tried to rewrite your tale properly. They claimed you were a noble's daughter, deceived and forced into piracy, that you were just a victim, that your death was a tragedy of womanhood. You could not stand to refute it. But you did not lie still either, because somewhere, someone always noticed it didn't quite fit, and they kept the original, unedited, because they believed that what didn't fit was what had to be preserved. An old gravestone carver near the docks once etched a strange emblem. A ship with a broken prow, sails raised. Below it, a single straight line. Not a wave, not a storm, but a horizon yet to be reached. They asked him, "Whose stone is that?" He answered, "Don't know, but she deserved to be carved." No one questioned further. The stone bears no name, but anyone who sees it understands. This is the resting place of someone unbroken. You're not on official maps, but your name lingers on the margins, like a charcoal note, scribbled in haste, smudged but not erased. A young scholar once came across an old manuscript and read the line. She did not beg for pardon, did not repent, did not confess, did not. And he paused. He wrote in his journal, "If I'm ever condemned for living upright, I hope I'll be remembered like this." You don't need the history books to get you right. You just need someone to stop at the blank, the dash, the worn-out paper, and understand that someone once stood there. Someone who left behind not many words, but a silence that makes others reflect on themselves. You are not the main character. You are the one written half. But that half makes readers linger longer. This world won't remember you with medals, but with the errors no one dares correct. It's an incomplete sentence, a strange handwriting, a blot of ink in the middle of a page, tiny signs, but they whisper someone once lived without apologizing. You don't need to be entirely written. You just need someone to feel you and finish the rest. The judge who presided over your trial didn't live long afterward. They said he died of fever. Others claimed it was his heart. But his old wife whispered to a neighbor, he couldn't sleep. Every night he dreamed of a woman who refused to kneel. She didn't say your name. She didn't have to. Because in that house, only one woman had ever died without bowing her head. The executioner that day, the man who slipped the noose around your neck, changed jobs within a year, gave up executions, put down the blade, became a dock watchman. Someone asked, "Tired of hanging people?" He answered quietly, "Not tired." But there was one. She didn't look at me like a criminal. She looked at me like I had no right to touch her. No one pressed him. Some quietly understood. He had hanged the wrong person. A court clerk who used to record executions once got drunk in a small tavern and confessed, "I don't know why, but that day I couldn't write a word." Why not? My hand shook. The way she walked up to the gallows. No one should walk like that when they know they're about to die. Did she cry? Number. She made me want to. After that, he never wrote another verdict. He started keeping the books for a salt shop instead. You left behind no blood, no curses. You never returned. But those who sent you to your death remembered, not out of guilt, but because they couldn't understand why you weren't afraid. And the thing humans fear most is not evil. It's someone who does not need to fear. Once, the old jailer said that every morning after your execution, he passed your empty cell and still felt like someone was sitting there and not looking, not speaking, but present. He changed the lock. Didn't let anyone in. Not to guard it, but to avoid it. You didn't come back. You didn't need to. Just that you didn't scream, beg, or follow the script they expected was enough to unsettle them for the rest of their lives. They were used to killing those who begged, not those who didn't need saving. So you lived on, in the darkness of the magistrate's house, in the sudden knock when no one's at the door, in the uneasy silence between stories. You are the glitch in the system. The variable is unaccounted for. The consequence is that they don't dare name. You never sought revenge. You didn't become a ghost. You just remained. In memories no one wanted to keep, but no one could erase. You didn't haunt them because you died. You haunted them because you refused to live the way they demanded. And every time someone reaches out to punish another woman, somewhere in their mind, a feeling stirs. Without shape, without sound, just a sense. Don't do it. What if this one is like her? And that's how you won. Not with power, not with weapons, but with the one thing no one can unsee once they've witnessed it. A death that did not submit. That girl grew up in a fishing village. She went out to sea with her father every day. She spent each night mending nets with her mother. No one ever told her about you. But one night, upon hearing someone scold a woman for talking like a man, she suddenly wondered, then what does talking like a woman sound like? The question came from nowhere. No one had taught her to ask it. But it was there, like salt seeping through stone. Quiet, patient. You weren't present, but you were the one who planted that question. In another city, a girl studied shipbuilding. She was the only one in the class without a beard. The instructor said, "Why is a girl learning this trade?" She didn't argue, but her hands didn't stop working. That night, back home, she opened her notebook and quietly wrote along the margin, "If someone once steered an entire ship through a storm, why can't I sketch its hull?" No one told her about you, but somewhere, somehow, she'd heard something ancient and true. A little girl asked her mother, "Mom, has anyone ever been punished just for being a woman?" The mother hesitated. Finally, she replied, "There was one. I don't know her name, but she didn't apologize. Because she wasn't wrong? Number. Because she didn't need anyone's permission to live as herself." The girl nodded, not fully understanding. But she'd remember. She'd grow up with a quiet space in her mind, reserved for the moments someone tells her, "Girls shouldn't. You are silent, but you make others speak. Not about you, but about themselves, about choice, about boundaries, about things that should never have been imposed. If someone had once done differently, you're no longer here to instruct. But you live deep enough that whenever someone begins to bend, they pause and wonder, can my spine really bear not being straight? No school bears your name, no coin bears your face, but some lessons teach better than 100 professors when they're not part of the curriculum. You are one of those lessons, unofficial, uncensored, but impossible to ban. Some girls don't know how to read or write, but they know how to clench their fists. They know how to step outside. They know how to say no when pushed into places they didn't choose. And when someone asks how they dared to do it, they just shrug. I don't know, but someone once did. They don't need to know your name, just that you once existed. You weren't the beginning of everything, not the first heroine, not a flawless figure. You were simply the one who walked to the end of the road and didn't change to survive. And because of that, girls long after you, in places where no one remembers your name, still ask the questions you weren't allowed to. If I live honestly, who has the right to judge me? That's how you continue, not through monuments, not through biographies, but through a small flicker of doubt in the minds of those once taught to obey. You left no will, only something persistent. I'm not wrong just because I'm not like the others. One day, some girl will say those words in her voice on a windy morning or a sleepless night without remembering who said them first. I only needed to know that that voice was authentic. No one teaches about you in classrooms. No curriculum says, "Today we'll study the woman who didn't bow when they hanged her." And yet, somehow, children still grow up carrying you inside them. Not in memory, but in instinct. A woman is told by her boss in a lowered voice that she's too stubborn. She doesn't argue, don't cry. He doesn't back down. She returns to her seat, edits her proposal, crosses out the fluff, and keeps her original idea intact. When a coworker asks, "Aren't you afraid?" she simply smiles. "I might be wrong, but I don't need to be treated gently to live rightly." No one mentions you. But you are there in the way she holds her back straight. A young girl is told by her friends, "Don't be dramatic. Girls should know when to stay quiet." She doesn't shout. He doesn't react. She simply says calmly, "If I were the silent version of me, I wouldn't be me." No applause. But no one dares dismiss it, because it isn't a slogan. It's a presence. Like you. You're no longer just a story. You're a principle, unwritten but felt every time someone approaches its edge. That principle doesn't teach how to win. It doesn't promise survival. It just whispers in someone's head whenever they're about to shrug and let it go. I might pay for this, but I won't betray myself. No one checks if you're still remembered, but every time someone stands alone and walks toward what they believe is right, that's when you come back to life. Not with a name, not with a body, but with the principle you held until the very end. Never bow just because others are uncomfortable. A boy once heard about you from his grandmother. He didn't remember the details, just one line. There was someone who was killed simply for living without apology. Years later, he didn't join in when his classmates mocked a girl for speaking up. I didn't defend her. I didn't tease her. He just stayed silent. Silent like someone who once heard a sentence that was never written down. You're no longer someone. You're what stops people from turning away when they should stand beside you. You're a quiet warning, a hidden mirror. The reason people tread carefully when they judge is because they know someone was once killed, not for doing wrong, but for refusing to play a simple role. You never screamed, "Remember me." You just exist in moments when someone stays silent at the right time, doesn't turn away, and doesn't follow the crowd. And that, no one can erase. You no longer live in flesh and blood. You live in every moment someone chooses to remain true, even quietly. In not retracting an accurate word just because it's called too bold. In the way someone signs a decision, knowing they'll lose their place, but not themselves. You have no shape, but you are formed. No voice, but you are echo. No recognition, but you are the secret standard people measure themselves against. When the night is quiet, you are the unissued rule. You are the test. You are the code for those who live upright without needing a reward. No one is exactly like you. You were once a pirate, a commander, someone who breathed between crashing waves, who looked at the noose the way others looked at their final sunset. But there are others who never rowed a boat, never went to sea, never got caught, never got hanged, who still piece you together, bit by bit, through their own lives. A woman with a small stall pulls her cart to the market each morning, knowing she'll be undercut and mocked for being just a woman selling goods. But she still opens her tarp and lays out each item. No one ever told her about you, but she lives like you, quietly, firmly, without needing a pat on the back. A student submits an essay titled "The Ones Without Statues," only to have it returned with a red note. Lacks historical basis. He resubmits it. Then, a third time. No added citations. No change in title. Not out of stubbornness, but because he feels that what hasn't been recognized doesn't mean it isn't real. You live in that third submission, not named, but present. A single father said, "What would a man know about raising a daughter?" She still cooks, combs her hair, and teaches her to stand tall, never to beg for acceptance. When she asks, "Where did you learn that?" he just smiles. From someone no one remembers clearly. You're pieced together from scattered lives. A ticket vendor, a worker fired for refusing to do wrong, a writer whose books were never published, a person who stood up in a meeting knowing they'd lose their job. No one lives your life, but everyone has their moment. A moment when bowing would make life easier, but they don't bow. No one replaces you, but many carry you forward, not through grand gestures, just by holding still, in a world loud and full of compromise. They don't have to be like you. They just need to know that someone once lived and died for not choosing what was easy. You are an incomplete figure. Each person contributes a fragment. No one holds the whole, but each holds enough to live more truthfully, to hold a gaze without flinching, to walk without shuffling, to say "I disagree," not loudly, but firmly, without stepping back. You, once condemned, once erased, once hidden from official records, now return in the posture of a street vendor who refuses to back down, in the diary of a girl dreaming of captaining a ship, in the older woman who still keeps a rusty knife under her pillow, just to remember what it felt like to own her life. You don't belong to anyone, but you are the smallest piece of courage in many people. And in that way, you don't need to return, because you never truly left. You're no longer present in stories. No one begins by saying your name out loud. No one says, "Live like her." People just live, and accidentally live like you, without knowing, without trying. It's just that when faced with a choice that might make their spine bend, someone still chooses to keep it straight. An older woman in a coastal village sits on the sand daily, staring at the sea. Some say, she's waiting for someone to return. Others say, no, that's just how she lives. No one knows that in her mind, the morning sea breeze is a reminder that once she heard a story about a woman who stood tall on a ship's deck amid the howling waves and never once looked up to beg the sky for mercy. You're no longer in her words. You're in the way she sits, in the way she doesn't explain herself. A girl walks through the market and is stopped by 3 men who say, "The way you're dressed isn't proper." She doesn't respond. She simply steps aside. He doesn't back down. She doesn't bow her head. And her gaze, though not fierce, does not drop. You're in that gaze. Not because she read about you. Not because you appeared as a historical figure. You are instinct, a kind of quiet pride. There are actions no one applauds. No one records them. No one writes them into books. But they create a silent tremor. Someone refuses to nod at something everyone agrees to keep the peace. Someone refuses to sign papers they know are wrong, even if it means losing their job. Someone in a faraway mountain village says, "I disagree" during a meeting, knowing no one will support them. And you live in all of them. No one mentions you. But everyone does something that, if they were to pause midway, they'd hear a distant echo. I once died, but never bowed. You are the new habit of those who no longer suppress themselves. You are the quiet resolve of someone who won't erase the word I. You are the reason people suddenly understand that some things are worth keeping, even without reward. No one casts you in gold. No one puts your face on a wall. You live in the way people no longer hit delete when they write what they truly feel. You are not a light. You are the shadow left behind after lightning. No one sees you, but everyone sees themselves more clearly once the flash passes. You are the reason people no longer seek forgiveness for simply existing. You are why someone stands up at dinner today and says, "I'm tired of being quiet." No one taught them that line. Only you live quietly in the way they choose to sit, walk, and stay present rather than disappear for safety. You are a way of life no one teaches, praises, or officially recognizes. But everyone knows, when it counts, it's the only thing that keeps a person from vanishing. You are an unspoken reminder. Just be yourself, even when it's hard. And for many, that alone is the most incredible legacy. You were never a torch, never dazzling, never leading a parade, never standing in the square where everyone could see. You were the member. What's left after the blaze? Small, smoldering. But if it lands in the chest of someone dry and hollow, it's enough to catch fire. A young woman is leaving home for the first time. She carries little more than worn shoes, an old coat, and a story her mother once murmured. Long ago, someone was killed for refusing to speak words that weren't her own. She doesn't know the woman's face. He doesn't know the whole story. But she believes that if someone once lived that way, then maybe so can she. You didn't guide anyone. They didn't preach core values. Didn't tell people what to do. You left behind a straightforward thing, that you don't have to win to be worth something. You just have to remain yourself, even if no one sees it or claps. They call that losing, but you know, that is fire. You're the reason a child dares to talk back when unfairly blamed. The reason a poor seamstress lifts her chin and holds her prize, even in front of the rich. The quiet push that makes a single mother write a letter of apology to herself after years of endurance. No one told them to do that. But when they did, each one felt, someone walked this path before me. And I am not alone. You're why people remember. Not every death is defeat. Not every silence is surrender. Some deaths are worth more than a lifetime of obedience. Some silences demand to be remembered, even if no one speaks the name. Some fires rise just to flare brightly once. But you are what's left after the flare. The ember no one watches, but it travels. Through wind, through night, through hollow lungs, and rekindles something people thought they'd lost. Courage. You never asked anyone to live like you, but anyone who reaches a hard place and still chooses to stay true, it unknowingly carries a spark in you. They don't have to know. They don't have to remember. Fire needs no biography. It's only the right place to burn. You no longer exist as a person. You are that sudden sting. When someone is about to nod, just to make things easier, and suddenly, they don't. You are the flicker of a thought. If I give in this time, will I still be myself? You are the quiet choice no one sees, no one cheers, but that protects someone from being erased from their soul. You no longer need anyone to light a flame for you, because you have become the fire. And fire, it never asks for permission to exist. Some people spend their whole lives to realize, not everyone who lives long is remembered, and not everyone who dies young is forgotten. You are proof of that. A person executed, not for breaking the law, but for refusing to bend to it. You have no grave, no memorial day. There is nothing for people to bow to in remembrance, but you return. Each time, someone refuses to play dumb just to keep the peace. Each time, someone laughs in a place where they were never taught to feel joy. Each time, someone steps out of line without asking for permission. You were once captured, handcuffed, and branded a threat. Yet today, across countless places, people carry you like a quiet reassurance. No one prays to you, No statues stand in your name. But on a quiet weekend night, when a young woman hands in her resignation because she can't do what she doesn't believe in, you are there. Not to comfort, but to witness. To quietly say, "Don't be afraid. You're not the first." You return in the night, in a small room, when a 13-year-old wonders, if I'm not what people call normal, am I still allowed to be myself? No one answers them. But the next morning they go to school anyway, keep their long hair as they like, say it's okay when mocked. Because in a dream they saw a woman, standing in a place of execution, not pleading, not trembling, just looking forward. They don't know her name, but they know someone once dared. You return to the library, among books that never mention you. When a student writes a paper on unnamed women in history, the professor says, "No sources. Not academically valid." She submits it anyway. In her introduction she writes, "I'm writing about someone no one verifies, but everyone sees themselves in." You return to a bakery when the shop owner is pressured to sign a loan contract with cruel interest terms. She refuses. No one stands with her. No advice is offered. Only a voice from far away. Not hers or yours, but just enough to keep her hand from signing. If I give in now, I won't be myself anymore. You don't announce your return. You need no ceremony. You appear in people's spines when they are about to hunch because of exhaustion or loneliness, or the pressure of a world that demands they be easy to understand, easy to forgive, easy to accept. You don't lift them. You simply stand witness. There once was someone who walked alone and didn't lose herself. In another courtroom, far from where you were once hanged, a young woman stands trial for daring to speak up against her boss. She doesn't have much money. There was no wave of supporters. People expect her to back down, to drop the case. But she shows up, wears black, says little. And when the judge asks, "What do you want?" she replies, "To live as myself." No quotes, no speeches, just the spirit you once held. You return in unsent letters, in torn-up poems, in pencil sketches drawn in secret just to breathe. You are why people don't delete everything personal, even when the world tells them to conform. You are the reason someone keeps that unfinished manuscript. Those shoes that aren't fitting. That name doesn't please the family. Not because they matter to others, but because they are themselves. You never shouted, "Remember me." You never begged for injustice to be erased. You just lived, once, fully, and left behind enough so that others would know. You can lose without being lost. You can be silent without disappearing. You can walk alone without falling out of the world. You are the quiet strength of those who lived with depth. The courage no one teaches, but everyone hopes they have when it matters. You are the part that can't be erased from the minds of those who ever heard your story, even if it was only through a look, a glimpse. It's a half-told tale. And now, you are no longer in prison, no longer in the history books, no longer in the rope. You are in the choice not to compromise. In the nod, that doesn't apologize. In this way, someone chooses to live for real, even knowing the cost. You don't need gratitude, only that someone, somewhere, keeps living bravely and doesn't bow just to feel less alone. Because you went first, and no one who walks after you walks alone. There was no bell, no farewell. No one beat the drum 3 times to declare your life was over. There was only one thing that rang out softly. The one thing left after all the shouting, the sentences, the murmurs of history's scribes. A silence. One that no one could extinguish. They called death a complete stop. But you were never given a period, only an ellipsis, because someone still remembers. Someone still hasn't stopped. Someone is still living on for you in ways you never got the chance to. You were hanged, but you were never lowered from memory. You received no medals. No statue was carved in your image, but you are remembered through one simple act. When someone stands up, even knowing they won't be welcomed, you don't need to be retold correctly. You just need to be understood. And that, you already are. You began as a person, then became a shadow, then a whisper, then a principle, then a small flame, and finally you became a silence as solid as stone. No one can snuff you out. No one can erase you. No one can pack you neatly into a story. You spread like ink soaking into cloth. Impossible to wash out, eventually becoming part of the fabric itself. When some girl in some faraway place stands in the wind, hair flying, gripping a choice that doesn't fit the times, and quietly tells herself, "I'm not doing this to be better than anyone. I'm doing it to be myself." You are there, not beside her, not on her shoulder, but in her hand. The thing she grips, even though it shakes. The part of her that says, "I don't need permission." You, who were executed for living too, truthfully, are remembered because you never lived as anyone else. You were never timely, which is why you are never outdated. And if anyone ever asks, what's the point of a life cut short, with no allies, no defense? The answer is, you. You live to be an example, not of obedience, but of how you don't have to be understood to be worthy of holding on to yourself. They once called you unruly, disrespectful, a burden on the system. Now no one dares name you at all, because no word is enough. You no longer fit into the language. You are what remains after the last word fades. And that is something far from finished. You died, but you did not end. You no longer have a name. But every time someone anywhere says, "I will not apologize for who I am," you live again and keep living. Quiet, unbending, wordless, without applause. Just an unextinguishable silence.